The Dawson Adventures. Dawson's Revenge. For Tony Gates, a friend who loves the anglins. Let's get straight into that. I sat up on a ridge watching the fire fight down in the bottoms. One man with a rifle and a handgun fighting off 4 well-armed men. The lone shooter's horse was dead, shot out from under him from what I could tell. I hadn't seen the beginning of this confrontation, but from what I could see on the ridge, I thought the odds were against a single man, and it became apparent to me that this was going to be over pretty quick, unless someone took an interest in what was going on. And I stroked my horse's neck. Well, Banjo, looks like we're going to stick our nose in somebody else's business. Again. I leaned over and tied my holster to my leg, checked my .45 to ensure it was loaded, and made my way off the ridge, riding straight into the mouth of hell. The 4 men who had the other man pinned down spied me moving down the slope and turned their fire towards me. Now, Pilgrim, I don't like to be shot at by renegades or anyone else. Makes no difference if who's shooting at me is white, red, brown, yellow or black. I'm gonna shoot back. I veered off and scudded around the dead fool. I saw a dead horse and figured it was the man pinned down. The shooting had stopped, and so I reined up, climbed out of the saddle, and tied Banjo up. I removed my rifle, grabbed a box of rifle shells from my saddlebags, and tried to quietly make my way through the trees where the party of 4 had one man pinned down. I'd almost made my way up to where I could see the pinned down man's back when I caught movement off to the side. The poor fella didn't have a clue that he was about to be shot. The sneak behind him was aiming at his back. I knew now whose side I needed to be on. I whistled low-like. The gunman turned, brought his gun up, and I shot him in the chest. My bullet slammed into him and lifted him off his feet. And the man I'd saved spun around, a wicked long bowie knife in his hand. I picked up the dead man's rifle and unbuckled his holster and shell belt. I tossed the pistol, holster and shell belt over to the man, who nodded his appreciation. Then I put my finger to my lips to indicate silence. Dick, came a voice. You get that bastard? Dick? No, I replied. The only thing Dick got was a death from a .45. Why, you? Come and get us back, you shooting sidewinders. And there was silence. And then we heard horses moving off. I was hoping there'd be a spare, Dick's own horse. I appreciate you dealing yourself in, mister, the man said. He was refilling his own gun from Dick's shell belt. Man, I can always use another handgun and rifle, he said. He could use a horse more, unless... He tried to take yours, he smiled. He tried to take yours, he smiled. Not a horse thief. I see they left his horse tied. I'll strip my gear, put my gear on his horse, take it to my nephew's place up north of Crazy Woman Creek. Nephew, you say? Yep, Henry Anglin. Here my big brother sitting back in a rocker, drinking some fine whiskey. Abraham, your older brother? Uh-huh. My name's Moses Anglin. And I grinned and held out mine and shook hands. I'm Morgan Dawson. The hell, you say? I heard a lot about you. Your pa, may he rest in peace, was married to Angie. Did you ever know her maiden name was Morgan? He asked. And, in all honesty, I never really thought about her maiden name. She'd just always been Ma. Your ma was a Morgan. 3rd cousins to our family, the Anglins. That's how you come by your name after your ma and pa. Morgan Dawson. Cousin. I was cousin to the Anglins. Chapter 1. 3 men rode our back trail. From time to time I changed the direction we were travelling with hope of throwing them off. I noticed Moses from time to time searching the timber. I didn't know if he was searching for defensive cover or for something else. Cousin, he said quietly. Cousin, looks and feels like we have rain going to move in on us, and we picked up 3 snoops a ways back. Yeah, I know. The 3 men who tried to kill you. You're carrying their dead partner's gear. You any good with those guns? Good enough to have kept you alive earlier, cousin. Touche. We need to find a hole to crawl in. Don't want to get wet around here soon. There. I stood in the saddle and pointed towards a rock ledge. In front of it was a large cedar tree, its limbs heavy and bent touching the ground. Moses grunted. It'll do. I rode up to the tree. I climbed off and had a look. It'll do, Moses. It's dry and someone has stayed here before. They left a fire ring. Anywhere's okay as long as it's dry, he said. We brought the 3 horses in under the limbs. It was like a dark shady curtains. A shallow rocky outcropping would shield the animals. I gathered firewood and Moses began stripping the horses and rubbing them down, softly humming the Irish tune, Gary Owen. And while Moses tended to the stock, I built a small cooking fire and began making a pot of coffee. The wind had picked up and the limbs began moving around a bit. Morgan, I'm going to stretch this canvas above us. Make a lean-to, just in case we get heavy rain. The horses are going to be fine. No reason we should get wet. And so, Cousin Moses began to build a shelter under the cedar branches for us to sleep under. And when the coffee began to make, I cut some bacon off a slab and began cooking it. Added some beans and unwrapped some biscuits I had. Moses commented how good it all smelled. He sat on the ground beside me and found a cup and poured himself a cup of coffee. And the thunder was a little louder now, and there was a flash of lightning, and then we heard a scream, followed by a roar. Moses sipped his coffee as I filled him a plate. I guess that was one of those monsters I've heard about in these hills. Yeah, quite possibly. And I paused and took a bite of my food, swallowed a sip of hot coffee, and said, then again, one or more of those men following us might have died. Moses finished his plate, poured another cup of coffee, and said to me, cousin, you're a cheerful son of a bitch to ride with, ain't you? And I grinned at him over my coffee. And there had been 4 men. 4 men trying to dry gulch, 1 man for the money he'd made hunting and trapping all winter, and for the money he'd won playing cards the night before. Greed. They never sought honest work. Why work when he could put a mask on or rob stagecoaches, trains, freight offices, banks and such? A simple scarf across the lower part of the face or a blast of a gun was enough to ensure there were no witnesses. They had spotted Moses angling when he had ridden into that little Kansas town, leading a beat-up old grey mule loaded with fur pelts. The beat-up hat, buckskin jacket, and old cavalry uniform pants faded almost white with age, and dirty brown beard fooled the 4 thieves that this old man, well, he was easy pickings. Moses angling was not an easy mark. He'd fought for the Confederacy during the war, had scouted for the Yankee army following the war, had hunted bison, often sharing his kills with whichever warriors came upon him. He'd been involved in a range of disputes and had made and lost 2 fortunes. The first in Kentucky before the war, with his brothers Abraham and Elijah. He and his brothers had settled near what the locals called Angling Creek. Said creek was supplied by a runoff of falls, which Elijah called Angling Falls. And the second fortune he had lost in Lincoln County, New Mexico, when the Lincoln County War started. His range wasn't as big as the Chisholm spread, but the Murphy fraction stole him blind. He had fired a few shots and had emptied a few saddles. Garrett wanted him, have his name put on the wanted posters, but a young gunman named Billy Boney was more important, and so Moses rode out of New Mexico. He was not an easy mark. And Moses had taken the money he'd made from the sale of his pelts and had bought new clothes, had a haircut and shave. Then he sat in on a friendly poker game until the game took an unfriendly turn. Preston Ford dealt cards in Theobald Saloon. He made a good living at fleecing the locals with marked decks and sleight of hand. Only 2 local men had ever suggested he cheated, and they lay in the cemetery, pushing up flowers. Moses knew the card shark was a cheater. He knew the gambler had a gun lying on the table, inches away from his hand. When Angling called him on it, he grabbed for his gun, but Moses put 2 in his chest, gathered his own money, and decided the gambler's money. Out of the corner of his eyes, he'd watched the force around him. He read their intent. He reloaded his pistol, picked up the gambler's gun, and strolled out of the saloon, then mounted his horse and rode out of the town. And Moses told me that first night, under that cedar tree, he hadn't wanted trouble, but he knew they were going to make their move soon. The 3rd day on the trail came the ambush. They shot his horse out from under him. He had no chance to gather his canteen or saddlebags, which held extra ammunition, his money, and some jerk venison. Now he had held them off for a full day, until he ran out of shells for both his pistol and his rifle. The rest, he said, well, I knew. Mace Tucker was a killer. He'd end men, women, youngsters, anyone who was around him when he robbed or who saw his face, regardless of age or gender. It was a loose end. He could not allow them to live to be a potential witness if someone recognized his voice, his eyes, his gun, etc. He wrapped all of these insecurities up by simply pulling the trigger of a gun and killing them. If he was captured and tried, he knew he would hang. If he were going to be hung, he might as well kill a few also. And it was Tucker's plan to follow after Moses Anglin and kill him for his money and anything else of value. Only some stranger had interfered and killed Webb. Webb had ridden with Tucker for years. They'd stolen a lot of money together, but Webb had gotten overconfident, and someone, or the stranger probably, who cut him down. All day, he and his two half-breed partners had followed the two. One had continued to change directions in an attempt to throw them off the trail that they were actually following. Tucker and his two partners had watched the storm clouds gathering and had decided to find a dry place to wait out the storm. Tucker and one of the two had found an area among some old boulders and had stretched the canvas over the top of the boulders, where in four corners were smaller, heavier rocks. At a camp, it wasn't well built. Lazy folks will always want and take the work of others, claiming it as their own. One of Tucker's partners had left their camp with his rifle in search of something they could eat cooked over a fire. He left his horse in camp. The woods he entered were dark. The skies were cloudy, and the green canopy of leaves overhead made the woods appear uninviting. But they needed to meet. The hunter moved silently through the low-growing brush. A grey tree lay on the ground, and the hunter spotted movement. Deer? His hungry mind told him. Probably a doe, as he hadn't seen any antlers. And as he approached the tree, one stealthy movement at a time, he thought how surprised this deer was going to look when he slipped up upon him. And then it dawned on him there were no sounds. Forests are usually full of sounds of birds chirping, seeking shelter from the approaching storm. Rabbits scouring across the forest floor, seeking a hole to go into. The squirrels barking at trespassers. There were just no sounds. He had worked his way up to the tree. A low, guttural growl warned him that there was no deer beyond this down red oak. The hunter stopped, looked around, and heard the growls again. This time, however, the growl came from behind him. And slowly, he began to turn his head. He was sure he'd come upon a big black bear. And what was waiting for him was not a black bear. What stood behind him towered over him, covered in greyish-black hair, at least 8 feet tall, with red glowing eyes, a huge mouthful of sharp dagger-like teeth, a short, broad nose, pointed ears positioned on either side of its head, and human-like hands with long, ugly claws designed to rip and shred. The hunter screamed. The creature from the depths of hell itself roared, and 2 monstrous hands grabbed the hunter's head and tore it from his shoulders. Tucker and his remaining partner looked at one another, added fuel to their small fire, and waited cold and hungry through the night. Moses and I were comfortable in our shelter. The second morning we slipped into our slickers, made sure our guns were loaded and in working order. We thought we needed to pay a visit to our trackers. We had every intention of setting them afoot with no food or weapons. It wasn't our intention of killing them unless it just couldn't be helped. The way I figured it, these men, if not wanted, were close to it. And we mounted our horses and walked them in a direction we heard the scream and roar from. And the clouds were still dark and foreboding. Occasionally, I felt a raindrop hit me in the face. Those woods frightened me. I shook my 44-40 out of its saddle scabbard, and I was ready. My horse Banjo was a big Appaloosa gelding I'd been given by a friend who traded him when I'd been shot in ambush a few years ago. Now Banjo didn't like the looks of this setup as he ported a wet ground and wanted to go in a different direction. Moses' horse and the pack horse were also unwilling to go any farther. "Morgan," Moses said quietly, "these horses smell something they don't care for. Neither do I." "You telling me you can smell what they smell?" "I smell blood and death." "Well, let's tie the animals up and have a look," I said. We tied the animals and quietly we entered the woods. We hadn't walked too far when we were assaulted by the smell of death. We began looking even closer into the shadows, and then I saw it. I forced myself not to gag or vomit. I tapped Moses on the shoulder and pointed. The hunter's head had been impaled on a sharp limb in front of a huge red oak. Half his face had been eaten away. The remainder of his body lay across the trunk of the tree, his internal organs ripped from the body. And Moses began searching the ground for tracks. He found several indentions and began removing dead grass, leaves, and such. And I heard a low whistle and walked over to look. Damn big man did this. Crazy man, Morgan. Why, the fellow who slaughtered this guy must be 8 or 9 feet tall. A regular Goliath. Why, these tracks must be 18 to 20 inches long. He must weigh close to 800 pounds. It wasn't a man who did this, Moses. A big Gugway. A face eater killed this man. This, what'd you call it? A Gugway. Yeah, this Gugway. Is he one of these monsters that are supposed to haunt these hills and hollers? Yeah. After seeing all this, cousin, I believe you. We didn't take time to bury the dead man. I explained the beast's trophies were obvious territorial markers. We remounted our horses and rode off. Our destination, the angling compound on Crazy Woman Creek. And Tucker and his remaining partner figured when they'd heard the scream and roar, there would be no reason to search for their partner, and so before daylight they had saddled their horses and rode out. Moses and I continued our ride towards the angling compound. Many times from out the corner of my eye, I would see a fleeting glimpse of something, or maybe several somethings, following us at a distance. Moses took his rifle out once, and I was afraid he was going to fire. I cautioned him not to fire. We had too many renegades and renegade creatures already on our trail. On our third day out, we found the remains of a man on the banks of the Mountain Fork River. He was torn to pieces in the manner we found the first man. There were empty shell casings all around him. He put up a good fight. Moses and I counted 3 different sized tracks in the mud. And no man deserves to die like this. He spat a stream of tobacco into one of the tracks. Nobody, he repeated. I said nothing. Then we found a small stream and crossed it. Something big burst from the heavy brush, and we saw it was only a longhorn steer. You never knew what you were going to find in those hills and valleys. Chapter 2. Let's get straight into that. Trace Tucker crossed Crazy Woman Creek 2 days before Moses and I did. We had to fight off not just a Gugway, but some kind of solid white crawling thing. I'd never seen nor had heard of this crawling creature. As far as I could tell, it wasn't working with the Gugway, but was out for itself. And we didn't kill it, but we made it too hot to stick around. The face eaters, they didn't care. They'd charge openly and sneak around moving from tree to tree in an effort to get to us. When we crossed Crazy Woman Creek, we were met by men with guns. And I grinned when I saw a familiar figure riding through the cowards. Men, he shouted, this is my uncle, Moses Anglin. Some of you should remember Morgan Dawson. Hello, Dutch, I called out. Nephew, Moses called out. I'm afraid your long-lost cousin and I have brought an element of danger to your range. Long-lost what? Cousin? Morgan? That's a long story, Dutch. I'm surprised your pa never told you. Well, it ain't gonna get told sitting on these horses. The compound's only a few miles away. Kurt, Dutch called out. And a tall, thin hand pushed his horse through. He had a wad of chewing tobacco in his left cheek. He spat a stream onto the ground. The gun he wore for a crossbody draw was tied down. It looked like he knew exactly how to use it. Kurt, I consider it a personal favor if you'd see to Mr. Dawson's pack horse. Yep, I get it careful. I'm sure the marshal don't remember me. I remember him, though. I looked him over. Kurt McGee, about a year before I retired, took a bullet in your left shoulder. Yes, sir, your bullet. I let you live. Yes, sir, you did. I'm grateful for that. You even spoke up for me when you got me back to East Texas. Because you spoke up for me, I was allowed to work and support my ma until she passed. Mr. Anglin found me looking for work. Well, here I am. He rode up to me, offered his hand, and took my pack horse, and then rode off. Well, come on, fellas. I'm sure Pa and Henry will be pleased to see you. How in the name of God did you two run into each other? Asked Abraham. Well, Abe, there were 4 coyotes trying to ambush me and kill me for my money. Angie's boy came along and pulled my fat out the fire. When you found out who he was, you felt an obligation to tell him he's our kinfolk? So, laughed Dutch. Cousin Angie Morgan married. What was his given name, Pa? Hugh Dawson. Angie married Hugh Dawson. Morgan was their firstborn. So Hugh and Angie combined their last names and came up with Morgan Dawson. Uh-huh. Well, no wonder I always get into trouble when I'm around him. Oh, and there was laughter. Henry Anglin had sat quietly listening to Moses' story of how we met. The smoke of his long, slim cigar rising above his head. I noticed him rise out of his overstuffed chair, move to the front door, and strap on his twin, ivory-handled .45s. He picked up his flat-crowned back hat and opened the door. I moved up behind him quickly. Are you going someplace, Henry? Well, I thought I'd go see a man about 2 horses, Morg. Where did he ride, Henry? Couple of days ago. Claimed he and his partner were ambushed. Didn't mention he and his comrades in crime had tried to kill my uncle and my cousin. Well, Goodway's killed 2 of his friends, not me. I killed 1 saving Moses. Henry and I were walking across the compound. Never really got a look at any of those Jaspers, except for the one I killed saving Moses, and the 2 the Goodways had killed. I didn't care to remember their faces. Henry had met him, Mace Tucker. It was a hard man to forget. A hard man with an edge. He just didn't care about what happened to others, just what happened to himself. He was sitting in the shade of a supply building when he looked up and saw Henry Anglin and me walking and looking. I don't think he knew who I was, but he knew Moses by sight, and he had to figure I was the guy riding with Moses. I heard one of the hands coming out of the bunkhouse yelling, "Hey, mister, that's my horse!" And Tucker responded by drawing his gun and shooting the hired hand through his body. The horse he was on was built for speed, and Tucker was through the 2 big gates which opened inwards into the compound. I ran over to check on the hand, and it was Kurt McGee. He was coughing up blood. There was nothing that I could do for him. I cradled his head in my lap, and he knew he was dying. "Bastard shoots better than you, Marshal," he said as he coughed more blood. I had no desire to correct him, telling him I was no longer a lawman. "I'll get him, Kurt. I promise you." He forced a smile, and then he was gone. Henry reached down and took my hand to lift me up. "Let's go after him, Morg." "You better stay behind, Henry. I'm going to kill him. Cold-blooded murder. That's what he committed, and that's what I'm going to do to him. Bring him back alive, Morgan. We'll try him here. We'll hang him. I'll make Kurt a promise. I won't break it. Then let's ride." And one of the angling hands brought out our horses. Moses asked one of their drovers if he might borrow his pony. Abraham turned to Dutch. "I'm riding out with Henry, Morgan and Moses. Stay here, son. Get those gates closed and put him out in that turret Henry built. Keep those creatures out. Hold up, little brother. I'm riding with y'all." 4 men rode out of the compound that early afternoon. 1 remained, and he had the gates locked. He had ordered 2 men in the turret Henry had built to rain fire down upon any enemy. Dutch Anglin patrolled the grounds. He hadn't known Kurt McGee long, but he and a few others dug him a proper grave. Over the grave, Dutch read from the Bible. He concluded his remarks by saying, "You can rest in peace, Kurt. Morgan's going to either gun him down or hang him. He has no idea who's trailing him." Nor did I know who was trailing us. I knew for sure when we came upon a family of Choctaw fording up in a grove of hardwoods. Abraham and Moses found the Choctaw laying saplings between a stand of hickory trees. They asked what was going on and were told there were face-eaters coming. And they knew. They couldn't explain how they knew, but they were for sure. We asked about the man riding a horse as if hell and the devil himself were following. Yes, they said. He was constantly looking over his shoulder, whipping the horse and urging it to run faster. We thanked them and then rode on. Abraham reined his horse up short, and behind us we could hear unearthly roars, screams, and gunshots. The 4 of us turned our horses and started back to where the small band of Choctaw had been fortifying their makeshift camp. We went in slow and spaced side by side. The scene before us was right out of the most horrifying penny dreadful you could ever read. Bodies lay everywhere. Body parts were scattered. Men, women, and children. Horses and mules were mutilated. And blood, it was everywhere. Moses and Abraham climbed off their horses, rode over them, and began gathering the remains into the center of the camp. Henry and I began gathering the saplings and piling them on top of the bodies. It was only one way we could care for the bodies: mass cremation. There was only one way to catch up with the murderer of Kurt McGee, and someone had to stay on his trail. The creatures who did this may decide to protect Dutch in the compound, said Abraham. The flames had caught good. I think I'll go back to the compound. Dutch might need some help. I cleared my throat. I have to keep riding. I made a promise to a dying man. I'm going to keep my promise. The three of you need to head back. Moses spat a stream of tobacco juice. Someone needs to stay here. His brown eyes burned into mine. Pick me up on your way back through, cousin. I'll be here. Henry walked up to my horse, lay a gloved hand on the pommel of my saddle. You do what you have to, Morgan. I hold nothing against you. You're a man of your word. Do what you think is best. Just get some justice for Kurt, and everyone that piece of filth is killed. I nodded and looked over to Moses. You hang tough, Moses. I'll pick you up on my way back. I whipped my horse Banjo, and we were once more on the trail. Chapter 3. Let's get straight into that. And Tucker ran his stolen horse down. The pony was covered in sweat and foam. It needed to rest. It needed water. It stumbled trying to climb a steep hill, had no strength left, and then fell. Tucker managed to clear himself out of the saddle. He cursed himself for pushing the horse too hard and not giving him a rest. And from his position, he could see me, pick him away on his trail. He was armed with 2 .45 Colts, his rifle still in its saddle boot. Once more, he panicked. Clawing his way up the hill, he spotted what appeared to be an abandoned log cabin. I'm sure he must have thought that this would be a perfect place for an ambush. I paused just inside the tree line. Nothing moved. Nothing stirred. Even the spring breeze was non-existent. From out of nowhere, a bullet smacked into the tree. I dove off Banjo, bringing my rifle with me. I lay among the cool green grass, with a few large limbs providing me some cover. Hey, mister, I heard from across the tree line to the corner of the cabin. I got no reason to kill you, he shouted. Just back off. Bring me that horse and you can live. I didn't answer. I knew if I answered, it'd use the sound of my voice to find me. Okay, Pilgrim. You want to die? I'll oblige you. He fired randomly. 1 or 2 kicked up some dirt. I couldn't get a good shot, so I began crawling backwards farther into the tree line. I rolled over, put a big hickory tree between us, and regained my feet. And as quietly as I could, I began circling in the timber on the cabin site. Halfway around, I spotted him. He would look back at the cabin door from time to time, as if he heard someone moving about inside. The door was closed, so it was a possibility someone was inside. I made a mistake and allowed him to see me. He opened fire, but continued to miss. I brought a .44-40 up and fired. I knew I winged him. He stepped out away from the cabin. He shoved his gun into his holster, and he began to shout. Step out, damn you! Step out! Take your chance with me in the open! I knew his pistol was holstered. I could see his hands. Blood ran down his left shoulder. I had hit him. I stepped out of the timber, rifle in my left hand. His face was covered in sweat, and he was trembling. You know who I am? I didn't answer. I was concentrated on his wild, crazy eyes. I'm Mace Tucker. I killed a lot of people who never knew my name. I'm telling you, I can see you're impressed. Who are you? Morgan Dawson. His hand dove for his gun. I put one in his chest before he realized what had happened, and he staggered backwards. That was for Kurt McGee. This will be for all you got away with killing. And killers, even dying with panic, Tucker staggered to the cabin, jerked open the door, and fell back screaming as a Gugway emerged from inside the cabin. The creature slashed at Tucker and opened up his neck. It fell upon him, sinking its teeth into the wounded neck area. The abomination carried the body inside, and I backed away, found my hat and my horse, and silently slipped away. I found Moses where I'd left him, impaled on 2 long stakes with the heads of 2 Gugways. You have visitors? Well, I was gone, cousin Moses. Yeah, 2, but I sent him on their way. You look okay? I'm good, Moses. Let's ride. I realized on that ride back to the angling compound, I wasn't a tame angling, and I had gotten revenge for Kurt. Wow. Wow. Suddenly another one. Wow. Absolutely exhilarating, chest-pounding, nail-biting action and terror from the incredible mind of David Holley, exclusive to the DMTForestOfFEAR channel. Big thank you, David, once again for letting us go back through this incredible collection of yours. I really do hope you're enjoying this as much as I am as we revisit the good times and the adventures of the Hostile Intent series. Well, guys and girls, as ever, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. Now, if you can pen a story packing that much punch, then please do get in touch with me at the contact email, which is as on screen. contactthedeadone@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. As always, guys and girls, I hope you're well and happy and taking a fight back to life and trying to stay fit and focused. But above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.